Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. It's really funny. Something just really funny happened. Looks like Twitter is not working, guys. So be it. We're going to remove Twitter from my, you know what this does? This actually makes it so that when I live stream, I have absolutely no reason to pay for StreamYard now because they don't stream places that I need them to. So that's what that is. Anyway, today we're going to talk about making cheese, and it is Monday, July 15th, 2024. This is episode 928 of Living Free in Tennessee. We've been going back to some of the homesteading basics on Monday shows in the last little while. You may not have noticed that, but we have. And I did a cheese class this weekend out at Tactical Response. So I thought this is a great time to talk to people about how to make cheese. And as I started thinking about the best way to approach it today in an audio podcast, because obviously, if you take a cheese making workshop, that's one thing. But in an audio podcast, like how much can we convey? And the answer is a good amount. And today we're going to talk about 3 soft cheeses that can get you started in cheese making that aren't hard to make. But once you get really good at making these cheeses, like consistently over time, you can move on to more advanced soft cheeses, get into hard cheeses. It's really about getting your chops together for making cheese and then going from there. So that's what the main topic of today's show is. Of course, we'll do all of our usual segments, including Tales from the Prepper Pantry, a frugality tip, and Operation Independence. The weekly shopping report from Joe was not out when I did my show notes, and I did read his last one. So I figured we'll just skip that one for this week. If you want to know what the weekly shopping report is, though, consider becoming a community member over at MeWe.com. We are living free in Tennessee over there. You have to apply to join the group, but Joe puts them up every week, and usually he has them out for the Monday show, but sometimes he doesn't, and then we skip it and we bring it up the next week. I have found that to be a very valuable addition to the podcast because we can see how prices are changing over time, and I've had a lot of positive feedback just about it being interesting to see how different regions have different prices for the same things, which is totally a thing. Anyway, that's what we're going to be going over today. Before we jump into that, I want to talk about our featured event of today's show, and that is the Self-Reliance Boot Camp on October 4th. That's the day before Self-Reliance Festival. We've got like 7 or 8 instructors doing a whole bunch of different things. We're going to learn everything from cooking with fire to processing your own animals to off-grid living and water treatment, water processing, water collection from Sean Mills. We've got Sunny Puzikas coming in and doing self-defense. We've got medical preparedness. We've got just big picture, how to make a plan to be more self-reliant. Jack Spirko is going to jump in. I'm going to teach a segment. John Willis is going to teach. Amanda Willis is going to go over herbal remedies. So lots of really cool stuff all packed into one day. That means we're doing like 30 minutes per segment or per session there, which is fast. And you don't get a lot of breaks. It starts at 7:30 or 8 in the morning. We'll refine that a little bit as we get closer, and we'll go till 4 p.m. Your lunch is included. That's over at selfreliancefestival.com, and just go to workshops in the upper navigation, and you'll see all the other workshops as well. And the link is in the show notes if you click on your thingy on your phone, if you're listening to the audio podcast. Also want to thank our 2 sponsors of today's show. I just got notice today that my EMP shield is on the way, and I'm super excited about that because we did lose a fence charger to a lightning strike this year, and I'm glad it was only the fence charger and not all of the appliances in my house or in the cabin. And I have been like waiting for a while because they were so popular this year that they had a backlog to get through. So like my order, of course, they process orders, like as they come in, right? Well, my order came in later than it should have. We'll just put it that way. And so it's my fault. I've been putting this off for a while, but EMP Shield makes, I think, the best surge protecting a device that I found on the market, and it includes an insurance policy if their device fails to work. If you have a surge of some sort, and your appliances get like nuked, they will replace up to $25,000 what happened, the damage, and that's pretty darn cool. They're the only device I know that has that on the market. And we're having all sorts of increase in lightning strikes here in our power system our power grid in our area. I don't know how it is for y'all, but EMP Shield is a great device, empshield.com. If you use the coupon code LFTN, you can get $50 off that item. Okay, our second sponsor of today's show is DiscountMylarBags.com. Discount Mylar Bags is more than just Mylar bags. It's run by my friend Toby, who is really good at sourcing things in bulk and then passing on savings to you, the consumer. And he got really interested in just all sorts of different ways to store and preserve food for long term. So it's not just bags, it's other ways that you can store food. And he's got great resources over at discountmylarbags.com. If you are a member, you get a discount on your order. And if you look on the right-hand side of his website, he has some articles he's written just on his opinion on what size and how to store food so that you don't make a mistake and buy a bag that's way too big for your storage because you're trying to be efficient and then realize, well, now that I've opened this 5-gallon bag of, potato flakes, I guess we're having potatoes every meal for the rest of our life, right? Of course, you can always reseal things, but he's put a lot of thought into it, and it's definitely worth reading what he has put together. Our live stream schedule this week is right now, and then tomorrow at 12:30, I'll be live with a dude named Blake Reimer, who is a farmer I met over at Amani and Rivers, who has been using Korean natural gardening methods to raise pigs in small footprints with no smell, which is pretty darn cool. He also took over his family farm, which was a commercial chicken production facility. Yeah, the ones you don't like Tyson supported sort of thing, and transitioned it from that to a permaculture oriented farm without going out of business. And that's something we're going to talk about at 12:30 p.m. tomorrow. So check that out. Also tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Central, 9 o'clock Eastern, I get to be on Angry Preppers channel, and who knows what will come up, but I understand that there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump this weekend, and I'm pretty sure that'll probably come up, among other things. So that's tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Check that out. I'll shoot a link out for all of these before I go live. And then finally, we have our usual Friday Homestead Happening show at 9:30 a.m. Central on Friday. With that, it's time for our first segment of today's show, and that is Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is all about storing what you use and using what you store, and it's been a very sad canning season so far. It's been a rather sad garden season for me this year, too. Some stuff's doing well, but some stuff is not. And the thing I like to can the most, besides tomatoes, they're like neck and neck, are green beans. I like to have lots of green beans going into winter, and I just don't have any to can right now. Like, we're just eating them fresh. That's all that's happening. I'm hoping that we turn the corner on that one soon. But there just hasn't been a lot of canning to do, which means my pantry is not filling up in a very satisfying way, the way I like it to at this time of year. So hopefully this weekend I'll have some luck from maybe some other farms sourcing and see what happens there. But if that doesn't happen, I need to think very carefully about my fall garden. In fact, I'm starting already like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage for a fall garden. And I might actually start some green beans and some other stuff inside and some squash inside with the idea of transplanting them in September when like the worst of the oven heat is past, and see if I can get just sort of a second bloom of those sorts of things in the fall. I've done that before and had pretty good luck with it. So we'll see how that goes. But it has been a sad canning season. I am able to dehydrate a bunch of, it's been a great herb year though, in contrast to that. So we have a lot of herbs going into the prepper pantry that I'm just drying at room temperature. And that's going really well. I am now home for a bit. I'm not sure how long I'm home for right now, but that means that we are on our usual homestead schedule. And that it means I also have the capacity to do the freezer project. Then the freezer project is this. About quarterly, I like to go through the freezers and just reorganize where we're at, because we get different types of meats in our freezers at different types of year, at different times of year. And I like to go through and just sort of organize that and reorganize it about 4 times a year. And I put off my last audit by about, oh, I don't know, it's been about a month and a half now. And it is definitely time. And I have one whole freezer that's practically empty, which is great because that means I can take all of the stuff out of one of my freezers because I have 4 total freezers. I can take all of my stuff out of the chest freezer, organize what I know I'm going to want, in which way. Like I can put all the pork in one place and all the lamb in another place in that empty freezer, and then defrost it because I did not get the self-defrosting chest freezer, and then figure out how I'm going to categorize out that one and then do another upright freezer. So that works really well. But I'm also able to pull things out. And this is what I did today. I just went to the chest freezer, which I know has the oldest meats in it, pulled out whatever looked kind of weird or hard to cook. And that's what we're having for dinner this week. And the reason I'm doing that this week is I'm home to think about it. So I'll be able to do my 3 p.m. dinner prep segment most days this week. And then that means that we can still do early dinner and also use up some of the things that take a little bit more of my involvement to cook. It's not just like sear off the steak and serve it, which is like a super easy meal. But sometimes, like when you're going to do a cow's tongue, you want to prep the cow's tongue. And I didn't pull one of those out, but I will in the next few weeks. And that may mean that I'm prepping at 3:00 today for a cow's tongue tomorrow, for example. But that's sort of how I like to approach those things. So we're doing hard to cook week this week. I also wanted to share with you how we're using an abundance of cucumbers because it's been a good cucumber year in contrast to the bad green bean year. And I've noticed this when I garden, like sometimes it's just like it's the year of the insert blank here. And so cucumbers are doing great this year. And so we've had a lot of cucumber salads as a side dish. And the way I like to do it is to cut up onion very finely or just do a bunch of green onion, put it in my salad bowl and drizzle it with lemon juice. And I am actually using lemon juice concentrate, like the bottle of lemon juice that you get, the real lemon, that you get. If you can get actual real lemons and squeeze one of those, that works just as well. If you don't have access to that, you can use a little bit of vinegar, basically something acidic. That's what you're looking for there. Balsamic vinegar works really well. And I also put salt and I stir that up and I let it sit for about half an hour so the salt can draw out the onion juice. And then I take my mandolin that I got from Chef Brett. And that's just a device that thinly cuts things. And here's the thing, if you're going to use one of those, it will also thinly slice your fingers if you do not use it with caution. So what this does is sort of shaves little rounds of cucumbers. Now, of course, if you don't have one of those, just use your knife and cut it as thinly as possible. I just like the mandolin because it's very consistent and it's fast. If you have a food processor, you can just use the thing that goes, right? There's lots of different ways to do the same thing. I just happen to have the mandolin, so I use the mandolin. And I'll do 4 or 5. So let's say it's about 2 tablespoons total of diced up tomato. It's not super finely diced, but it's diced. And then I'll do about 4 cucumbers that are usually about 4 inches long and about 1.5 inches around, maybe 1 inch. Like they're not big. They're more like a hybrid between a good pickling, canning cucumber and a good slicing cucumber. So it's not like the big fat ones at the store. And the reason is I like a denser cucumber for the salad. If all I have are store cucumbers, though, I'll use those. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of volume. I usually end up with about 4 cups of slices of cucumbers. And then I stir that into the lemon juice and salt mixture. And usually I put in about a teaspoon of salt, by the way. And I let that sit for another half hour at room temperature or in the fridge, depending. Like if room temperature in your house is 90 degrees, don't put it in your fridge. If it's like my house is, 72-ish degrees, because yes, I use my air conditioner. It's fine on the counter. What'll happen is that salt will do to the cucumbers what it did to the onions and pull some of the liquid out. The reason I let it sit is I want that to happen because it changes the mouthfeel of the salad. But also, if I don't do that and I just dress it right away, probably half an hour into dinner, all of that moisture is going to come out anyway, and you'll end up with sort of a runny sauce on your salad. Then I stir in about 2 teaspoons of dried dill. If it's fresh dill, you can pull like the little teeny leaves, not the dill heads. And I add pepper, and I add 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise. You can use sour cream instead, by the way. It's really good with sour cream. And then I add balsamic vinegar, about 2 teaspoons of that. And I stir that all up. It's like a balsamic vinegar reduction, so it's like a glaze, not the runny stuff. If you're gonna use the runny stuff, like you don't necessarily need the vinegar. I just like that balsamic glaze in there. So then I stir that all up, and this week I'm adding a bunch of cut up feta cheese chunks because I screwed up my cheese, and they're not going to store well in the brine. So I'm using it in the next week because it's hanging around in my fridge unbrined. Stir that up, and it makes a delicious cucumber salad. If you don't want dill, I have a bunch of fresh basil. Slice up fresh basil leaves. There's lots of different herbs you can put on it. So that's a great way to be flexible with it. And then that's the fresh cucumber salad. That uses up a lot of cucumbers. Just saying. That feeds 2 of us here, or 3. I think a normal family of 4 would get 1 serving off of that if you do smaller servings. And then like scale that as you wish. The redneck eats a lot. So, when I say how many it serves here, I mean it's a family of 4 basically eating that. Maybe a family of 3 if they're like big salad eaters. So that's the cucumber recipe I wanted to share, just in case you too are experiencing an abundance of cucumber issue. We can talk maybe next week if I still see that cucumbers are coming on hard. We can talk about something to do besides making dill pickles with cucumbers for long-term preservation. Okay. Speaking of dill, I have always dreamed of having a dill patch that just reseeds itself every year and grows itself. I've dreamed of this for many, many years. And I still don't have one, but Dawn Gorham does. And she put up online, like, my garden's not looking great, but this hillside of dill is. Does anybody want any? And I was like, I do, but you're far from me. And luckily, my friend Jennifer brought me a whole bunch. So we have all the dill we're going to need for the next few years. And it's dehydrating right now in my kitchen at room temperature. I'll be cutting that up and storing it vacuum sealed in many different ways between now and so that I have access to it. One of the cool things about dill is that like you have these stems that are like as tall as you, and the seed heads are great for making dill pickles, for example, or for putting in your ferments. And the little wispy leaves are what you use like in the salad I just said. One way to process them, if you're trying to sort of optimize or capture everything you need, is to cut all the heads off for your dill pickles. And after they're dry, store them however you're going to store them, in mason jars or whatever. And then cut the stems that have all the wispies on it. Like take all the stems off with the wispies off of the central stalk, which does not have wispies. And if you put those in the freezer, they'll freeze, and then when you take them out, they come off very easily. When they're dry, they also come off very easily, but save those wispies because you'll end up with tons of dill. And then the stalks themselves, like the sticks of the dill, has dill flavor. And if, like me, you live an existence where there couldn't ever possibly be enough dill in your life, especially if you like making dill flavored things like pickled beets, pickled okra, pickled squash, pickled cucumbers, chutneys, all of those different things that you could put dill in addition to salad dressings and things that you cook in the house. Those stems have flavor. Obviously, you're not going to eat a woody dill stem, but same as the pickles with the dill heads, the dill seed heads, you can cut those up and put them in a jar with your quick pickles, and that flavor will come through. So I usually cut the woody stalk pieces and the stems left from taking the wispies off on the dill plant. I cut it up into like 3-inch segments so that if I need 2 dill heads per jar and I only have like 1, I can do that in a stick or 2. And I make my best estimation. And this is one of those things about cooking is like we have measurements and recipes, but for something like dill pickles, where you're putting stuff in the jar like that to just sort of ooze flavor, just like garlic is also another thing you'd put in the jar for quick pickles. You make your best guess, you go with it, it's probably going to taste good, and it usually does. And again, since I'm a person who's like, there can never be too much dill in my life, I'll add a second stick. If I think one's enough, I'll add two. Because it's not like you're going to get an overpowering dill flavor. There's, in my opinion, no such thing as overpowering dill unless it's in a commercial food system as the dill flavoring on Doritos or something like that, in which case that's not natural. So that's what's going on in the pantry right now. We are starting the great second bathroom remodel or rebuild of 2024. When I had to replace all the joists in my house, my little so I have a bathroom with a bathtub and all that. That's the big bathroom. The little bathroom, which was just a toilet and a sink, had to be ripped out. And I had just like tiled it, redone everything in that bathroom, put in drywall, and then the joists that were going under it had to be replaced. So we took everything out, and I was like, well, while everything's out, let's reframe the wall and put a little walk-in shower here too, because I have a clawfoot tub in my bathroom. And if I were to break my leg, it would be very hard to get in and out of said clawfoot tub. Well, Mama Sauce strained her knee pretty badly, and she's not here right now, but we expect to see her sometime this fall. And I was like, okay, well, we better. And I've been not like dealing with that bathroom. Like I'm trying to not go into debt on this project, right? So when I ran out of money, I stopped. And the kitchen is redone, and the living room looks good, and that whole back little bathroom slash laundry room area, it has subfloor, but it doesn't have any of the finishing done, and it works. Like, it has the rough plumbing, but with knowing that Mom's going to come in and shouldn't be climbing up over my clawfoot tub with her knee right now, I decided to get that bathroom done. So a friend's coming out to assess it this week, who has done work for us before, particularly drywall work. And we're going to look at getting that done. I'm building that shower with like a bench and a little handle so that anybody who might have some mobility issues can use it. And that actually sort of puts the finishing touch on the house here, which will be nice and useful. So that's all happening there as well. I don't know what this has to do with pantry or this show, but oh, it does, because as part of that, I'm like, why did I go off on that? I'm redoing the roof over the prepper pantry so that that can be buttoned up a little bit better, as well as sort of refinishing the outdoor kitchen space so that it's more protected from the elements when things happen. And hello, big time burr. Anyway, that's the deal. So that's you'll be hearing some stories about that, which will change how I store food a little bit. And we might finally get in a walk-in area where I can, like hang my sheep for 7 days at 35 or 40 degrees when we process them. So that would be nice to have in place too. Because right now we quarter them and put them in my outside fridge, and that's the best. That's what I have. So that's what I do. Speaking of that, Blake sent me a picture of a ram he processed today. I was like, yeah, perfect weather. It's 95 degrees outside. Perfect weather for processing animals. And he was like, well, I have a cool bot, so it's not a big deal. And I thought, okay, yeah, well, that makes sense then. This is not the time of year I tend to process large animals unless something went horribly wrong on the homestead. Next up, we have a frugality tip. And this one is not from Margot, although I have one in the hopper from Margot. If you want to get a frugality tip in, send it to me, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com. But I just got back from a weekend event in Camden. And formerly, when I've had weekend events in Camden, I've gone out there and grabbed like a hotel room or an Airbnb, and those cost me anywhere from $80 to $120 a night. And I would stay 1 or 2 nights, and then I'd go back. And I do that because I while I can camp, at most times of year in that part of Tennessee, I would rather be in a place with heating and cooling and a shower and all of the things that I like. So, that might be me being bougie, but that's who I am. So there we go. I can camp, but I don't camp very often unless I'm backpacking. I like my comforts, guys. But as y'all know, we have a glamper set up here on the homestead that I'm going to start renting as like through Hip Camp and that sort of thing. But I've been working on it to convert it to run off solar. and we just put a new roof on it, and during that time was not a time you would want to be staying in the camper. I'm also ripping out the septic system that's in there, the black water system, and I'm putting in a composting toilet because ain't nobody want to deal with that out of your black water tank, and composting human manure is way less smelly and way better to deal with when you're doing those sorts of things. So um we were ready with the roof replacement, like just in time for me to take it to Camden for the cheese class I taught this weekend and for the alumni weekend that Tactical Response did. And then SOE had a party as well. I asked John Willis if I could park it at his place. And what that means is I spent about $40 in extra gas because I already have the camper in order to be in Camden, which is $20 a night. Now, the reason that really came together for me from a budgetary or frugality standpoint is that I had access to park it on somebody else's property who lets me use their water and let me plug in without charging me for it. Um, and I'm really glad I was able to do that because camping this weekend would have been pretty miserable there. We had a big old heat wave this weekend. So it was, heat indexing above 100 and it was hot, man. I'll tell you what, guys, it was hot. It was hot at night. It was hot during the day. It was really interesting weather out there, but we had a really good time. And if you think about it, like on the frugality scale, because also what you have when you have a camper like that or a camp stove with you, you can bring food. So I didn't spend a bunch of money on food. I had my steaks in there. I didn't eat my steaks. Actually, we ate those last night. But I had hot dogs and some other stuff with me. I had an easy way to make coffee. Now, how does this apply to you? Well, really consider when you're on a trip like this, how can you kind of either use a lodging where you book an Airbnb with a kitchen so you don't have to go out to eat to save money, or if you have a camper, can you bring the camper? Or if you have a good camp setup like a tent, is the weather right for it and can you do that? Those are some ways to get out and about and not spend as much money. And that was my plan the whole time. So we got that done. That's my frugality tip, is really look at your travel and how it makes best sense, but never compromise on what you want, right? So if what your standards are for when you're traveling is I want, what mine are at this time of year is I want access to air conditioning at night and I would like access to a shower at least once a day, and I'd prefer it to be hot and cold water. And I want to be able to cook. Those are my things. As long as I have that, I'm good to go. Then I can plan around those things and be pretty comfortable while not spending $300 a night on a luxury hotel in Camden, Tennessee. Anybody hear the sarcasm there? I'm pretty sure there's no such thing as a luxury hotel in Camden, Tennessee that costs $300 a night. But you can drop 80 for sure there. So with that, it's time for our last segment before the main topic of today's show, and that is Operation Independence. This is where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives here and finding ways to do things that we don't have to pay a man, so we don't have to earn our money plus the taxes we pay on our money to pay a guy who's going to pay taxes on the money that we pay him and then do whatever he needs to do with that, where somebody pays more taxes on the same money. Have you ever thought about that, like how that works? So you earn money, you earn $100, and then you pay 30% of that. So let's say you have 70 left, and then you pay somebody $70 to do something. They take that $70 and they pay like 30% on that, right? So then we're dropping it down, what, 70, 60, 50, like it's like 50 something bucks, $54 or something like that. Trust me, my math on the fly is never exact, but it's close. So then they take that money and they buy groceries in Tennessee, and then you pay like, I don't know, what is it, 6.5% on groceries. And that just keeps, like, every time we move that dollar, it gets taxed. And that money goes to the bullshit. It goes to the bullshit that's happening around you every day. That's what you're paying for. That's how you're paying for it. And so when you find ways to not have to do that transaction, you just didn't add to the bullshit. And that was a big motivator for us, like coming up with the game where we figured out how not to pay a guy to do a thing all the time here. Well, the part of it was that I had developed a debt perspective and a debt point of view, and I needed to not do that. And so I needed to just think way better, differently about the money that I was using in my life, but also that tax velocity really started bugging me as I thought about how that works. That being said, this week we have hip cappers coming in. So we're using our home to generate wealth for ourselves, which is a homestead mentality. And one way I do that is I do list my homestead as rentable. Now, for much of the year, for the last year, it has not been available to rent because we had my joists ripped out. And I had like everything that goes inside the house was outside the house, and then there was construction stuff outside the house, and then there was stuff we'd ripped out of the house outside the house, and it looked a mess. It still kind of looks a mess here, but it was not a place I felt that I could represent well to hip campers. And we're over that hump, which is nice. Plus, Tracy Eversole came over and made sure the outdoor kitchen looked all nice before they arrived today. But it's awesome. Like, we've got somebody coming for 3 nights. I hope they will be okay with as hot as it is and no rain here, but it might rain tomorrow or the next day. They'll love it if it rains here because it is hot right now. They're coming in. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know who they are, but I'm looking forward to meeting them and just making a little revenue off of my property while we do it. That's something that's basically no skin off my neck and can bring in a little bit of extra cash. So check out, I mean, like, if you have a nice camp spot that's not too invasive, like, check out Hip Camp and see what your options are there. I know people who rent backyards in cities and you have to bring your own tent. And the person comes in and sleeps in their backyard and then eventually leaves, and that's it. And they make, in the cities, they'll make 50, 60 bucks a night. Some people provide the tent. Some people get all fancy with it and put cots in there and air conditioning and all sorts of different things. So I thought I'd share that example. We actually have 2 hip campers this month, which kind of surprised me because usually we get hip campers in October when it's really good to camp here, and September when it's usually good to camp here. But July, usually not so much. So I'm hoping they've thought about what they have gotten themselves into with this one. Anyway, with that, it's time for the main topic of today's show. And that's 3 cheeses of Orient or of homesteading are 3 cheeses you can make to get you started. How many of you in the comments have always wanted to make cheese? Anyone? Bueller? I know I've always, like, when I first started making cheese, I always wanted to make cheese. And I was pretty intimidated by the process. And then I took a cheese class, and it was a weird day, but I made myself go. It's like one of those days where a bunch of stuff happened in the morning where you're like, and now I have cheese class. I've been looking forward to this class forever, but man, I'm not looking forward to it right now. Rachel says, yep, I've always wanted to make cheese. Solstice Girl has always wanted to make cheese. Yeah. So why did you want to make cheese? Like, why do you want to? Is it because cheese is delicious? Is it because you have too much milk? One of the reasons I always wanted to make cheese is I think my whole life I've thought about what happens if I really like something and I can't get it anymore. And I don't know why I always thought that way, but as a result of asking myself that question, it started with spaghetti sauce, by the way. I really like spaghetti, which is sad because I'm now ketogenic eater and the pasta and spaghetti is a problem. But I like spaghetti and marinara. Rachel says the reason she wants to make cheese is food quality. Yep. And I thought, well, what if I can't get spaghetti sauce? I was like 19 when I had this thought happen. And I was like, well, maybe I should learn how. But at that time, I already knew you could add like garlic and basil, and it basically was marinara sauce, right? And oregano. But the sauce I made wasn't as good as the sauce from the store at that time. And so then I started a long experiment of learning how to make spaghetti sauce by adjusting the herbs and other flavor and analyzing it and like figuring out why I didn't like it. And I was using canned tomato sauce from the store at that time. And then I went to tomatoes and cooking it down. And I just kept asking myself, how can I do this more from scratch? How can I do this more from scratch? So obviously with cheese, I was like, well, I really like cheese. So how can I do cheese? Now in the comments, we're getting, it's delicious. And what happens if you can't buy it in the store? Quality, right? All of these things. Food quality is a big one. Rachel says, I need to redo your cheese webinar. Yes, you do. Or you need to come to my cheese class, which I think is happening in October. But the date won't be announced yet because I actually sat Tactical down before I did this podcast and I said, do you think I could do a cheese class in September? And he told me that it was a terrible idea and that 3 weeks after Self Reliance Festival is a better time, which would put us at about October 21st ish, which is probably when I'm aiming to do the cheese class. That one's going to be limited 6 to 8 people on the homestead, and we'll probably be here for 4 to 6 hours making different cheeses together in a way where we can be hands-on. And it's just not, the webinar is watch Nicole make cheese and then do what she did. Here, you'll be making your own cheese if we do that. So I have to talk to the milk people and make sure at that time of year I can get milk, and then we go from there. Anyway, the reason I like to make cheese is that it's my ridiculous, weird obsession with learning how to do everything from absolute scratch, just so I know how to do it. And then sometimes I keep doing it, and other times I'm like with soap, well, that was fun. Now I can make soap, and I'm going to buy soap from other people who make soap because I don't really love making soap. And another reason to do it is you can take that milk, and this is the quality issue that we're having in the comments. You can take that milk that you get from the farmer as part of your herd share, or however you're getting your milk from your farmer, and you can tap into the quality of the food, the grass-fedness of your milk, the proteins that are different than the store milk, like all of the reasons you get the milk, you can tap into that, preserve it for the long term so you have access to those same nutrients, or adjusted nutrients, really, if you think about what happens with cheese, and have that in the winter when often your herd share dries up. I'm lucky enough to have a herd share that does not dry up over the winter, although I'm sure if for some reason their cows did, then we wouldn't have a herd share for a few weeks. They've figured out how to rotate it. But they have more milk at certain times of year and less milk at other times of year, just like anything else. That also means if you know your farmer well, if they have way too much milk and they don't have a way to deal with it, you can be like, hey, I make cheese at those times of year when you have too much milk, tell me, and we can work out a deal. Maybe I can pay a little less for the milk or trade you some cheesy cheeses, right? There's lots of ways that turns into operation independence over time. I will tell you this, financially speaking, tapping into the raw milk, herd share milk, and making it into cheese is not cheaper than just buying the cheap cheese at the store. It like dollar for dollar costs more. I get a way better product, and I have more stability of sourcing and less dependence on a just-in-time delivery system that in the commercial food. But it does not cost me less money. And that's not true of grinding my own wheat and making my own bread. I make bread pretty cheap. I don't make bread anymore, but when I did, and that was because I ground the wheat berries, and you can source wheat berries for reasonable. And then when you like, it's even if you're making it from already ground wheat and flour, you do pretty well in that regard. If I compare my handmade cheeses to the ones that I pay at the artisan local cheese store, Farmer Storehouse in Sparta, Tennessee, for example, I do come out ahead. So that doesn't mean I don't buy those craft cheeses, by the way, because I totally do. Because there are some people with some chops who sell their cheeses there that are like better than cheeses I've ever made. But it's, you do save money if you're comparing yourself sort of to that more craft market. So I think learning how to make cheese is a great skill to have, and it helps you understand how milk works. So if we think about, have you ever asked yourself this question? When and how did cheese come to be in our world, right? And you go back and you start researching the history of cheese. It's not like the history of quick pickles, where you can pinpoint a time where there was a technological development that happened as the commercial food system was developing and quick pickles became a thing. And quick pickled things became more common than fermented things, which was the former way of preserving those sorts of things, right? Cheese is so old that we just don't exact it. It wasn't like, okay, we figured out for this region that's it's kind of like beer, right? Beers and meads and alcohols, like we don't know exactly which day in which year some person was like, I'm going to turn honey into mead, or like what happened probably with alcohol is somebody's whatever, honey and water, or they collected too watery honey from bees, fermented, became alcoholic, and they drank it because at that time, if you had any sustenance, I'm pretty sure you used it if it didn't make you sick. They discovered that they enjoyed being drunk, and then they figured out why that happened and started honing that craft. I'm pretty sure that's what happened with cheese too. So the earliest reference I can find to cheese is around 5000 BC in Croatia. They found residue of cheese. Cheese residue. If you think about the climate in Croatia, it makes sense that maybe in a cave you could find some cheese residue. It wasn't so warm all the time that um, that things disappeared. Yeah, disappeared. Um, 2000 BC in Egypt, there were writings of cheese, but they haven't found the cheese residue at that time. So they were already talking about how to make cheese at that point. I think it's 8 or 900 BC. The Roman Empire has got to come up. The Roman Empire helped us spread cheeses through different regions, from regions to regions. And over, up until about 1600 AD, what happened with cheese is it became, it probably happened well before this, right? But it was a regional thing that became regionally appropriate for different areas. What was required for cheese to happen was collecting mammalian milk from something. It could be milk from a cow. It could be milk from a goat. It could be milk from sheep. It doesn't really matter. I'm sure you could make cheese out of pig milk. I've never milked a pig. Uh, when I think about how big Lady Pig was and what her demeanor was when she was milkable, I'm not sure I'd want to milk a pig, but you can make cheese out of pig's milk or anything else. It's just you need that you need you need the milk product to get started, and then we can make cheese out of our milk. Just saying. Just to go down that road for a second. So at some point somebody had milk because they realized that milk is a great way to store lots of calories, and it's in a small container. Really, if you think about how many calories are in a couple 8 ounces of milk, and it basically did what the honey did, right? Bacteria ate the sugars and fermented it, and it caused it to sour. So if you've ever dealt with raw milk much, you know that if you leave your raw milk out on the counter overnight on accident, you're going to come back to buttermilk or sour cream or something of that nature. It's going to sour almost all the time. Not every time, but almost all the time it's going to sour. And people who are very worried about food safety with raw milk are going to say throw it away. But if you think about what happened there, the lactobacillus bacteria probably woke up and was like, sugar, I'm going to acidify this thing. And it pooped out an acidic substance, and it was sugars. And next thing you know, you have sort of like a yogurty, whatever, buttermilky, whatever. It just sort of depends on how it went. Um, and then if you decided to transport said yogurt in, I don't know, like a pouch that holds liquids that doesn't leak, how would we make one of those if we didn't have access to Nalgene? I know. I bet if you took a stomach of an animal and put it in there after you'd processed the animal, that would make a pretty good waterproof pouch, wouldn't it? You know what's in that stomach? Enzymes. And you know what those enzymes do? They make the curd curd. They make the solids stick together rather than be a bunch of tiny little specks. And then if after traveling with that, you notice that the consistency of your yogurty drink had changed, and that's all you had with you and you were hungry, guess what you'd do? You'd eat it. And you'd probably drink the whey as well, because what would happen is it would sort of become whey over here and curds over there, like cottage cheese, like Little Miss Muffet. And you'd eat that, and then you'd be like, that's actually kind of delicious. I wonder why that happened. And then you would reproduce it. That's how I imagine cheese really happened. Is it's sort of natural that milk will sour, and it is natural that you would have carried it in the thing that produces the enzyme that makes the curd. And then once you figure that out, you'd start playing with this and figuring out that if you cook the curd and press more of the whey out of the curd and age it in a cool, dark place, you have a cheese that lasts a very long time. And a lot of our ability to survive as a species in the climate that we're in on planet Earth revolves around being able to have enough to eat through the winter months when things aren't growing in a cold climate, so that when things regenerate and come back in the spring and you have access to food that's growing again, you're still alive. So you need to gain as much weight before the winter happens, and you need to have enough sustenance through the winter to keep yourself going. And the longer you can keep food from spoiling to the point where you can't eat it, the better off you are. And, in our world now, we have access to grocery stores and to food all year round. It's actually kind of miraculous and amazing, and hasn't been reality for all that very long if you think about how long human beings have been around, right? Like canning food's only been around, like canned food has only been around for what, 150 years or so. It's not that long. We knew how to dry stuff, but fermenting is another way to keep food good. And cheese is a fermented dairy product that, if you do it right, it lasts a really long time, especially if you store it right. Like if you think about how long a hard Parmesan can last, it's years. And that's kind of an amazing way to store calories. Plus, it's delicious. So that's just, there are some benchmarks that you can verify along the way with cheese. But if you think about how cheese probably came to be, we're pretty sure that's how it probably came to be. And then, once you know how that works, it's interesting. So one of the key ingredients in cheese, by the way, we'll go through materials in a second, or what you need to get started, is rennet, which is that enzyme I was talking about in the stomach. They've figured out how to make rennet from vegetable product now. So most of the rennet you buy these days is not from stomach enzymes. It is from a plant. So then, knowing that about cheese, and knowing that you can spend many hours making a cheese, how do you get started as a normal person in making cheese? I say you follow the path of least resistance and you make some of the easiest cheeses first, and you get good at them. And once you're good at them, you can go on to the next thing. So I like to start with anybody with soft cheeses. And if you think about how cheese works, like you start with milk and you need to separate the solids from the liquids. So you need to curdle the milk. If you're going to make something that makes a curd, you need to make that curd connect to itself. And then you need to do something with the curd to make it into the cheese that you want. But the thing about cheese is, as long as you didn't do something crazy like use milk that's gone bad that smells like a poopy baby diaper, or you know how that like bad milk smell. It's not, sour is different than bad milk, by the way. Sour cream or yogurt are like sour milk. Milk that's actually gone bad has sort of a pretty rotten, nasty smell and flavor, and probably will make your tummy hurt a lot. So, I like to think about it like, how can we just do a few of the steps? Because then if you make the curd and you want to make a hard cheese, you cook the curd, you press the curd, you age the curd, you store the cheese, and you age the cheese over time, and then you can use the cheese. There's a lot of all these other steps. But you can start by just doing the first few steps and getting really good at them. And I thought of like what 3 cheeses would be fun to talk about today. And I think homemade ricotta, ricotta, farmer's cheese, which is also sort of cream cheese, and then Chev. So this gets you through turning milk from liquid to solid in 2 ways with 3 different ingredients. And then what you do with the cheese afterwards. And it's a cheese that you want to use within about a week of making it, week or two, depending on what your milk is, right? So what do you need to make these cheeses? One, you need milk. Can you use pasteurized milk to make cheese? Yes. Can you use ultra pasteurized milk? You know what I'm talking about? You know, that milk that doesn't go bad for like 4 months? That's ultra pasteurized. They've raised it to a higher temperature. The answer, I used to say no, but the answer is it's inconsistent. So sometimes you can get cheese out of it and sometimes you can't. And that's just because I went back and questioned prevailing wisdom and was like, well, I'm going to try using some ultra pasteurized heavy cream in this recipe and see what happens. And the answer was I could get some stuff out of the ultra pasteurized for ricotta. But in general, you're looking for a pasteurized only milk if you're buying it at the grocery store, or raw milk, which is not pasteurized at all. And we're going to get into this thing here. If you are concerned about using raw milk because you prefer pasteurized because you're worried about your exposure to diseases like E. coli and listeria, and you want to make cheese and the store only has ultra pasteurized milk, but you know a raw farmer where you can get raw milk, what you can do is buy the raw milk and pasteurize it yourself. And then you have pasteurized and not ultra pasteurized milk. So that's a decision you make for you. I love my raw milk. I use my raw milk, and I have looked into what the risks with my raw milk are, and I'm not concerned about getting hurt by my raw milk. But that's a decision every individual needs to make for themselves after looking into it. So if you use pasteurized milk, you're going to add calcium chloride to it, which will help you get more solids out of the milk than if you don't use it. So you can still, if you don't have access to calcium chloride, you can still make cheese without adding it. You're just going to get less cheese from the same gallon of milk than you would if you add calcium chloride. And you add like a 1/4 teaspoon of liquid calcium chloride to gallon of milk about. And the thing is, you can buy cheese grade calcium chloride already mixed. It comes in a cute little bottle and it's, I don't know, $5 or $10. Or you can go to the canning section of Walmart and get the powdered calcium chloride, which is Pickle Crisp, which is used to keep your cucumbers crisper in quick pickles, and make your own for pennies on the dollar, because it's a 1/4 teaspoon of powdered calcium chloride to a 1/4 cup of water. That much calcium chloride is going to make you a lot of cheese before you need to mix more. And one little container of calcium chloride for me, making cheese, you know, a few times a month usually, when I was doing it with store milk, that lasted me a year. It might only last you half a year if you're a big cheese maker. It might last you years, plural. So I just stored it in a little glass jelly jar with a label on it, and it was good to go. Now, when you make that liquid, you take the powder and pour it into the liquid, not the other way. When calcium chloride mixes with water, it's sort of like lye. It's not lye like as it's going to eat your skin, but it heats up. So just be aware of that. It works a little better if you put the powder into the liquid than the other way around, and it's going to make the jelly jar warm that you're mixing it in. So don't get all shocked about that. So anyway, so that's your milk, and then that's the thing about calcium chloride. You're going to need either an acid or a culture to acidify. The culture acidifies the milk so that you can curdle the milk, which is separating the solids from the liquids. Now, when you eat milk in your stomach, guess what happens? You curdle the milk. You have everything in your stomach you need to make cheese. Unfortunately, your stomach is in there and not out here. So we gotta add our own. And there are 2 types of cultures primarily that you get. One is a mesophilic culture, which is for lower temperature cheeses, which are the cheeses we're making today. Thermophilic, you culture the milk at a higher temperature, and that would be something like a cheddar cheese or something. But we're going to be not using that. We're going to use mesophilic. I have to drink water today. And then when you separate the solids from the liquids, you have a bunch of little little pieces. If you want them to become one big awesome curd to develop community with each other and hold hands, you need rennet. Rennet's the enzyme from the stomach that I talked about. And that's pretty easy to source on Amazon or at cheesemaking.com. I'm actually going to start selling rennet at NicoleSauce.com probably before the end of this week. I just got my materials for that. I have to figure out how I'm going to ship it so I can price it and go from there. But one little 2-ounce bottle of rennet will last you a long time. And I just decided, because I source it in larger amounts, to start selling little bottles for people who are not making as much cheese as I am. Now, you also, other things you may want to have on hand to make these are a cloth through which you can strain the cheese. And I don't say cheesecloth. I say cheesecloth in my notes right now, but I don't mean like the cheesecloth you buy at the store, but 100-count pillowcase or sheet or something like that. Or I've bought the at Aldi every so often, they have these like super thin linen white napkins for $2. I bought like 10 of those when they had them. That's what I use. You can buy cheese specific cloth for straining. It's like $10 a cloth. And I figure like for $10, I could just buy a $2 or $3 pillowcase and cut it and be happy. Or a $5 sheet and make a bunch of cloths and be happy. If you know how to sew, you can even seam the edges so it doesn't get all frayed and weird. If you don't have any of that, but you have cloth napkins, those can work. It depends on how, you don't want it too fine. So you're looking at 100 count. You don't want 150 count. You want 100 count. If you had 90 count, thread count, whatever, I don't even know if that exists. You could use that as well. Okay. The next thing you want to have is a strainer, like a noodle strainer. That's just to hold the cloth when you pour the stuff through. And some cheeses, when your curds are cooked and bigger, you don't actually need the cloth to pour the whey, because you'll separate whey from curds in a lot of cheeses. Instant read thermometer is very helpful. If you don't have one, whatever, but it's nice to have one. Measuring cups, pots, that sort of thing. So that's what you need. Now, let's talk about the 3 cheeses. First cheese I would suggest doing would be a homemade ricotta cheese. And there are different ways to make this. So there's an advanced skill where you take whey from a different cheese and turn it into ricotta. But we're going to talk about how just to make it with stuff you can get at the store. Start with a half a gallon of whole milk. And you heat that on your stove very slowly or in a double boiler to 180 to 190 degrees. The way I know it's at that heat, if I don't have a thermometer, is it starts steaming a lot, but it's not like rolling. It's not boiling. And you might get some little bubbles around the edge of your pot. So if you don't have a thermometer, that's what you do. You just make your best guess. And then to that, you add 2 to 3 tablespoons of lemon juice and stir it well. Because you want to make sure it touches all of the milk, like from the bottom, around this way, around that way. Stir it for a minute or two. Then let that cool for a bit. I go about 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes. And then pour it. You take your cheesecloth, which is not cheesecloth, but your straining cloth. I'm going to call it a straining cloth. Get that wet so that it's not dry. Because when you get things wet, they're not dry. Line your colander with that. And then pour that mixture through the cloth and walk away. And the whey will strain out and you'll have the solids in there. Now, if you want to keep that whey for other uses like a foliar spray for your plants, which I'm going to be doing this week, or some other things, that's full of lactobacillus, which is awesome. Usually if you've used raw milk, or if it's just like straight up milk from the store, you can use that just to add nutrient. It doesn't have live bacteria or live cultures in it at that point, unless it's caught something from the air. I keep it because I usually have caught something from the air. I'll leave it out actually at this point. If I'm going to use it for like a plant spray, I'll leave it out overnight or for a couple of days until it smells sour. And then I will use it at that point. But that's just what I do. Like usually when I'm making cheeses, I'm not making this particular cheese unless I have a lasagna in my future. So usually I'm making a cultured one. Anyway, you strain it. And then once you have it strained to the consistency you want, which takes about 20 to 30 minutes for me with my cloth. It depends on your cloth. Add a little bit of salt, usually about a teaspoon of salt. Stir that up really well, and that's your ricotta. You don't have to add the salt though at all if you're gonna just put it in a lasagna, because you can spread it on your lasagna and then sprinkle a little salt over it, or make sure you have enough salt in the lasagna. So it sort of depends how you're gonna use that cheese. That's your homemade ricotta. Super easy to make. You can leave from having heard this and go make it. If you accidentally screw up and add the lemon juice at the beginning and then heat it to 180 degrees and then let it cool, it will still work, because the acid is just curdling the milk. Okay, so that's ricotta. Farmer's cheese, which is an uncultured cheese, is made as follows. Take that same half gallon of milk, heat it to 180 to 190 degrees, add a quarter cup of vinegar, and stir really well. Let it cool, strain, and then mix in herbs and the salt to taste. So you could add like basil and garlic and salt, and it's you spread that on crackers or bread and you eat it, and it's delicious. What's the difference between farmer's cheese and ricotta? I'll tell you what the difference is. There isn't one. The only difference in these two recipes is lemon juice versus vinegar, and you can use either of those in either recipe. They're basically the same thing. The difference is what you've done with it after you made the cheese. Now, if you take that farmer's cheese or the ricotta cheese and you put it through your Vitamix, it will change in consistency to a very nice cream cheese consistency for bagels. Done. So the difference, this is an uncultured cream cheese. So you can make a cultured cream cheese, totally different story. But an uncultured cream cheese is basically farmer's cheese that's been whipped up so that the mouthfeel is different. This weekend, I brought in a farmer's cheese and a farmer's cheese I'd put through the blender, where I put all the same herbs in it and made it exactly the same way twice. And I was like, and I let all the students taste it. I'm like, the only difference between these two cheeses is that one has been through a blender. And it was like, which one do you like best, right? At that point, you're talking about mouthfeel, and mouthfeel can impact how the flavor is. So that's just the thing. Okay, so those are the two cheeses that I hope to hear from some of you. You went away after hearing this podcast, got your milk and you're going to send me an email next week and say, I made my first cheese, Rachel. Okay, so those two are super easy. The third cheese to try, and this is your first cultured cheese, is Chev. Now, Chev is made from goat's milk, right? Well, it doesn't have to be. Milk is milk. You're going to get a slightly different product based on what kind of milk you use. But if what you can get your hands on is a gallon of cow's milk, use cow's milk. Now, this is a cultured cheese, meaning instead of using vinegar or lemon, we're going to use a mesophilic culture to sour the milk and then make our Chev from that. So here's what you need. 1 gallon of milk. And then you need about a quarter teaspoon of mesophilic culture that is powdered. If you have buttermilk, that will also work, or live yogurt, and you could put a cup of that into your gallon of milk. If you're using store milk that's pasteurized, you're going to put a quarter teaspoon of calcium chloride in, and then you also need rennet. So here's how this works. You heat you take your gallon of milk out, put it in the pot, and put your calcium chloride in it. And you heat that up to 80 to 90 degrees. And the way I do that is a double boiler style. I put water in my sink. I put a sous vide in my sink. I set it at about 85 degrees, and it circulates the water around a pot of milk that is heating the double boiler size. And then I walk away and I come back about 20 minutes later and it's up where it needs to be, around 85 degrees, sometimes 82 degrees. If I didn't have that, and this is the way I did it before I had a sous vide, I would put hot water in the sink, same thing, plunge the pot in there and stir it and check the temperature with my instant read about every 5 minutes. And I could tell by how fast it was rising in temperature if it was coming up to the right temperature. Okay. Now my water comes out at about 120 degrees, which means when I fill my sink, if I don't check the milk, it's going to overheat. So make that decision how you need to make that decision. There is no good way to tell that milk is about 80 or 90 degrees without a thermometer other than sticking your finger in and guessing. So that's on you. Like, it's totally worth having the thermometer for this one. So once that milk is heated, if it's raw milk, you have not added calcium chloride. If it's pasteurized milk, you have. You take your mesophilic culture. If it's the powdered kind, you sprinkle it over the top and just sort of let it sit for 10 to 30 seconds and then stir that in really well, but don't like whisk it in. You don't want to beat up the milk like it's like it's done you wrong. You want to stir it so it's thoroughly mixed in there. Um, like making sure you get from the bottom to the top and stir both directions. And then once that's in, you take a quarter teaspoon of liquid rennet and you stir that in as well. Same thing, don't beat it up. You're not trying to whip it, right? And once that's all done, you take it and you put it to the side and let it age for 12 hours, 12 to 15 hours, depending on how long it takes to make the curd. You want to keep it at about 80 degrees. And you can do this by keeping it in your sink with your sous vide on 80 degrees. You can put it on the counter in your house, which is probably somewhere between 70 and 90 degrees. And you don't stir it. You just let it sit. So if you're trying, here's the thing. You don't have to be religious about keeping this one at the right temperature. But if your house is very cold and it's winter, you're going to need to think, how can I keep this warm? You can put it in a cooler, like not with ice in the cooler, right? You can put it in the water in the cooler. You can put it like in your oven, which is protected. Just make your best guess at how to keep it at that temperature. And I put a cover on it so if there's any wandering fruit flies or whatever, they don't go in the cheese. This cheese time of day is a really great one to make it like right after dinner or right before dinner, because when you wake up tomorrow, it's done its sitting around part of its life. If you have a way to keep your yogurt at the right temperature, that's a good way to keep your chev at the right temperature. When I made chev most recently, which was not long ago, like last week, I put it on my counter and my house was 72-ish degrees. And I put it sort of towards the outside wall where the sun hits. I covered it. I walked away and I didn't worry about its temperature at all, because if it was less than 80 degrees, the culture is still working. It's just not working as fast. And once it starts solidifying, it holds its temperature a little bit better. So I just didn't fret about it. I was like, I'll just let it go a few more hours and be fine. Now, if you're using buttermilk or yogurt or something for your culture, instead of sprinkling it over the top, you need to mix that in really well with the liquid. That's the only difference there. So then once that's done, you're going to, same thing, get your cheesecloth nice and wet, line your colander, and then pour that through. That whey is cultured whey, by the way, when you think about curds and whey. And that is full of lactobacillus. And that is what I'm going to be treating my orchard trees with this week, by using a cup of that and a gallon of water and spraying them, because we're having some fire blight move in. So I need to de-fire blight a pear tree. I'm going to spray it. And then I'm spraying everybody else on the property who could get fire blight, because we had a little pressure from the cicadas this year, and one of my trees is not looking too happy. So I don't know if that one's savable, honestly, but I know that I have a whole bunch of fruit trees in my food forest who are young, who I don't want getting fire blight. So that's what I'm going to use my whey for this week. I feed my whey to chickens. I use it as a garden foliar spray. I use it as a soil drench. Like, I use it in my aquaponics system. I use whey for lots of things. You can use it instead of water to bake bread. Like, there's lots of things you can do with it. So when you're straining your chev, I leave it in the open colander. And then once it's kind of like the liquidiest part's gotten through, I tie two corners together over the top and then the other two over the top. And then I hang it for another, usually 1 to 4 hours, until it's the consistency of chev. And this is like when you're making bread and it needs to rise, you let it rise until it's risen enough. It's the same with chev. Like, you can have a creamier chev that goes in a container, it doesn't hold form, and that works really well as a dip. Or you can let it go a little bit drier. If you let it go too dry, you can mix some of that whey back in. But you basically do that, get the consistency you want, and then you knead in about a teaspoon of salt. and put it in, you make that little chev log, and then you coat the outside with whatever herbs you want: rosemary, basil, garlic, honey, blueberries that are dry, whatever, to turn the characteristic of your chev into whatever you want. And then I like to take saran wrap and have it sealed in that if I'm not going to eat it right away, and then I put it in the freezer for storage. That's what I do. Or if I'm going to eat it in the next week, I leave it out and I serve it. Anybody who came to the Homesteader Alliance meetups that I've done, I usually have made chev for that. Not always. The last couple I didn't because of things going on, but I like to put a nice homemade chev out at the Homesteader Alliance meetings we do here. So that's the third cheese. So once you master those, what you've figured out how to do at this point is you've learned how to curdle the milk. You've learned how to make cheese in different forms after you've gotten the result you wanted. You've learned how to culture milk to make cheese, and you've learned how to make curd. If you get really good at those things, going from that to cooking curd, making a feta, which is another soft cheese, stretching curd, which is what you do for a mozzarella, cheddaring your curd, which is what you do for a cheddar, and then going into hard cheeses and aging hard cheeses is actually pretty easy. It's mastering that first, like up to the curd point, that will make a difference in the quality of your cheeses over time. So I hope you enjoyed this show. Once you get these cheeses, you store them in the fridge for a week or two, or for any of these, you can definitely put them in the freezer. It doesn't really mess their mouthfeel up like it does with hard cheeses. And then take them out a couple days before you want them and use them within a week then. I love having ready access to homemade cheeses. And it's part of the life we have here. When things get real busy though, guys, I stop making cheese. So I try to make a lot of my cheeses all at once and store them. I try to tap into times where the farm has lots of milk. This year I didn't do that. They had lots of milk when I was doing Self-Reliance Festival and the spring workshop. So I didn't add cheese to that. So now I'm getting extra milk every week and doing cheese. It is what it is, right? I think it can be a really fun way to just bump up your culinary experience. Plus, you get skills along the way. And hello, Homestead Made Easy. Welcome to the very end of the show. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in two ways. One, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. Two, consider becoming a member. Find out more at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, go out, make it a great week.